Everybody, this is Mitchell Amador, CEO of Immunefi here on the Immunefi Show. And today we have a special guest. We have, well, Ov3rKoalafied. We'll call him Koala for short, because I think saying Ov3rKoalafied over and over again might be a bit long.
Yeah, we definitely run over time if you did that.
That we would. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about his experiences on the front lines of DeFi today with one of the most storied protocols in the space, and about where everything is going, right? Where's the agentic future going? How does governance look and feel in this new age? What primitives matter, and so on and so forth. But without going any further, I'm going to hand the mic over to him. So Koala, tell us a little bit about yourself, and don't be afraid to go into the details. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I mean, my story is essentially tipped some Bitcoin on Reddit back in like 2014, 2015, did some like Bitcoin faucets, promptly ignored it until 2017 when it went wild and my like $2 in Bitcoin had become $20. And I was like fresh out of college. So I was tracking it based on how many Chipotle burritos I could buy with my Bitcoin. And then I promptly bought the top at 20K end of 2017. And then everything started crashing. And I essentially was like, well, I can either learn what this is all about or just sell it and cut my losses. So I started to actually learn what I bought, went down the rabbit hole, tried trading for a bit, have always loved teaching, eventually found the Alchemix project where I'm currently working. More just found it because I wanted to volunteer some time to helping people understand it and everything. And that has just spiraled its way into becoming the COO at Alchemix at this point. So yeah, that's my short story.
I love how you found a real world application for crypto from the very beginning in the form of Chipotle.
Yeah.
Burritos.
Not that they expected it.
That's so funny. That's better than a lot of other interesting characters. A lot of other people started with the Silk Road or
yeah, I definitely know people who did that.
Right. I think by comparison, your interests were very practical. Very practical.
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about your experience with Alchemix. Now, Alchemix is a really interesting product. You know, a high-level overview would be helpful. But for context for everybody else, you know, Alchemix is one of, I would say, the really early DeFi protocols, right? And we've now gone through a few industry cycles. Things have changed a lot. And Alchemix is still here, still working, still creating value for users. So I want to understand, you know, in addition to the overview, what are the lessons that you learned running and building Alchemix that have given you guys such incredible staying power? Because we all want those secrets.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, Alchemix was actually, a lot of people don't know this, Alchemix was the first protocol that let you take loans off of yield-bearing collateral. So at the time, Aave only did like loans off of ETH and stablecoins. Now it's super common in DeFi, but Alchemix was the first one. And essentially that's kind of been what Alchemix fundamentally is like kind loans. So you take a loan off of your yield-bearing ETH and your loan is in synthetic ETH. And so in a way, you could also categorize it as like very predictable leverage farming. And that has stayed true through Alchemix V1, V2, and also with V3, which is coming either later this month or in April. So we've been lucky that we've been able to make 3 versions of this product. I mean, a lot of it is luck. We're lucky that we launched in a time where DeFi had a lot of eyes, and therefore we were able to build up a good treasury and user base. So you need that luck of either initial investments, initial treasury, initial revenue to build up that backstop. But from there, I think it really just comes down to the fact DeFi as a whole is still not huge. Having a protocol generating sustainable revenue is difficult. And I think we took very good care over the last few years to, 1, properly manage our treasury, 2, properly utilize the revenue we do earn, and then also just take really focus on turning Alchemix V2 into a sustainable protocol, just finding the inefficiencies and ways we could do things better, just to get to like a baseline sustainable state. And then by doing that, that meant that we didn't have this like deadline where we have to launch the new product, have to scale up revenue at a certain rate. And that gave us time to properly build Alchemix V3, which is far more scalable and should be able to earn a lot more revenue and take on a lot more TVL than Alchemix V1 and V2. So it definitely takes luck. But the main thing is just not overlooking the little things, hiring the right people, building up the right team. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is the people who have worked for Alchemix for a long time and are sticking around and that we keep around are people who fundamentally care about Alchemix. And that a lot of has come from hiring from the community, because I think you can end up in a scenario where either you blow through your treasury or just don't have enough funds or revenue and the product closes. But on the other hand, you have these projects who have massive treasuries. Everyone's getting their massive payout and no one's motivated anymore because ultimately people don't actually care about the product. So you need to have the funding, the treasury, but you need to hire and find people who actually care about what you're building. Because those are the people who will stick around through the bad times and through the times that are maybe better than you think. They won't just like quit and retire or something. So, yeah.
It almost sounds like you guys prioritize building a real sustainable business just on DeFi rails from day one and building a sustainable culture inside that organization as well.
Yeah, maybe more like day 360, because at launch, DeFi as a whole was just like everything in DeFi was unsustainable. And then I think when you stripped away all of that, I do think we were pretty quick to realize like, hey, all of this is unsustainable. How do we create sustainability in this unsustainable environment? And it's a weird balance, because at the same time, if you design a totally sustainable system, you're not accounting for the fact that DeFi does have a lot of unsustainable things that you can take advantage of as a protocol, such as like bribe multipliers and things like that for curve emissions and things. So it's this balance of recognizing that this isn't an efficient economic system necessarily, but that you do need a fundamentally sustainable base before you can take advantage of all these inefficiencies.
That's really interesting. Can you give us, numbers, like what's this current scale of Alchemix today?
Yeah, so I think right now we're probably around 40 million TVL, and that's coming down from like 1 billion TVL at launch. A lot of that is due to, again, this focus in the last 2 years of building Alchemix V3. We kind of stopped intentionally growing V2. And like I said, we were lucky to have a treasury and runway where we weren't on this like deadline where we have to have V2 making a certain amount of money, which let us really just maintain V2 and really focus on building V3. So yeah, we're around like 40 mil TVL last I checked, and that varies a lot with ETH price, of course. Yeah, treasury wise, we're probably around, I think treasury wise, we're around 8 million, 9 million, 10 million, somewhere in there. Again, varies a lot with ETH price. And yeah, so it's going to be interesting, because when V3 goes live, we're going to be kind of coming out of the woodwork to be like, hey, y'all haven't heard from us much over the last 2 years. We wanted to wait till we built this thing to talk about it, but it's going to be a lot more talking. And the fact we've even maintained 40 mil TVL or so with very little marketing or really trying to incentivize any new collateral kind of is clear that it is a product people find value in.
Sure.
Like, we're not just paying a bunch of people to put their money in us.
Right. People are. It's the objective value that is driving that TVL retention.
Yeah.
Can you give us any spoilers on what V3 looks like?
Yeah, we're just starting to publish info. The docs are actually live. If you go to docs.alchemix.fi, that will actually take you to the V3 docs right now. So that's the first alpha. But essentially, we built V3 with on-chain governance in mind during the development cycle, versus in the past, Alchemix and other protocols kind of punted on-chain governance as something they would figure out later. And then it usually becomes apparent it's not possible if you didn't consider it in your base design. So it makes Alchemix more decentralizable. It makes it a lot more parameterizable, so we can account for a lot more different market conditions. It creates, I think the main alpha is it creates a fixed yield opportunity for people who are redeeming the synthetic assets. So it's going to be a totally new fixed yield primitive in DeFi. Otherwise, it's really similar in that you can come and take a loan. Essentially, you're on a leverage farming position at that point, and you're going to get leverage yield. And where most leverage yield products are like, one day you're earning 100% APR, the other day it's negative 100% APR. With Alchemix, your range of outcomes is going to be more like 0 to 30% or something. So not as high of highs, not as low as lows, just a much more predictable outcome, which should give people more peace of mind in this like leverage farming and borrowing experience. And so now we have fixed yield, we have predictable leverage farming, and that all should hopefully create products that people can use that they don't have to check every day. And then they can actually use crypto to benefit their lives rather than suck up all their time.
So that would be great.
Yeah.
Do you see like the primary customers for V3? Do you see them primarily being, consumer banking, so to speak, or people looking for, yield on their crypto assets? Or do you see the, V3 being like more like backend infrastructure that neobanks or exchanges or similar types of toolings will plug in as a product that they offer on top for small yield while you guys are handling the backend? How do you see yourselves going to market there?
Yeah, this is interesting because you could also throw like AI agents in there. Like, is this going to be used by AI agents or people? And I mean, I think day one, we're just going to have the standard crypto UI. Anyone who's used to using DeFi on their own is going to be super familiar with it, and it's going to feel like home for them. I think ultimately all of these use cases are valid, and I think it mostly comes down to the front end and the integration. So like now we have the back end system, and it's like, how do you actually present that to the world? And you have to meet people where they're at. So I think as DeFi becomes more complicated, like I envision, like I do think it's good what Coinbase and other apps are doing, where you have this app people are used to using and holding their crypto like Coinbase, and then you give them these opportunities, and you can kind of limit the functionality a bit to limit their risk, and then let them essentially deposit into these opportunities through these apps. So I think there is a retail aspect of that, especially with the fixed yield and everything. I do think you kind of need some retail and some smaller LPs first in order to scale into those like neobank situations and stuff like that. And so there's I guess we're not trying to limit it in a way, more just trying to evaluate each use case and saying like, okay, on top of the base infrastructure, what do we need? Do we need a different UI or app for this use case? Do we need to go sit down with a company or a fund and just educate them on everything? Do we need to build additional infrastructure for them? And I don't think we have the full answer to that yet, because the V3 design was ultimately just the fundamentals of what makes Alchemix, and then from there. I do think AI agents are, I've yet to see like a good use of AI agents where they're ultimately the final decision maker. And as fast as things are evolving, it's hard to say that like AI agents without supervision are the right option. So I do think, sure, people might use an AI agent to be like, hey, can you help me deposit in Alchemix, or can you show me my options of where my money should go? Or they might say, hey, between Alchemix, Aave, and Morpho on any given day, move my funds to whatever the best opportunity is. And that's just about getting as much data available as possible, which we're doing anyway, because we think a lot of people who use protocols want to see this data. And so that means dashboards, APIs, data actually on chain. But I don't think we're really expecting to just like not have human users in the future at all.
I see. So it's kind of like a mix of potentially all three.
Yeah, we're not trying to commit yet to any specific one. AI has done a lot in the security space. Like the AI auditing tools have made huge leaps and bounds recently, and I'm sure you've seen stuff on your side too. That's like the main place we're using AI right now, is internally on like security reviews and stuff like that. It's just essentially an extra set of eyes.
Sure. I want to ask a little bit more about that kind of point that you intimated about how AI agents could be using these products. Like, we see an increasing amount of interaction. Obviously, the OpenClaw stuff has absolutely exploded, and people are getting a lot more comfortable delegating more and more of their work. I mean, certainly I've seen that on the Immunefi side with how we're using the LLM technologies today. It's just like everywhere in our business now, and it's really, really helping. It's amazing. But how are you seeing that future with regards to Alchemix's product? Like, are you expecting a world where there's kind of an agent economy where they're allocating large amounts of funds and nobody ever sees the UI, or like I guess I'm just very curious about what your vision is or what your sights are there.
Yeah, I think like I said, our initial UI is going to be kind of targeted to the DeFi user, but you just can't create one universal UI. And I think that's kind of the beauty of on-chain finance, is that you do have this inherent backend, which is the Solidity, which can be tapped into by AI or by other applications or things like that. So we definitely have a view that like the UI that we launch is not the primary access point of Alchemix. This is one of many places that we're going to have to meet users where they are, including AI agents who are going to be operating exclusively on chain. And yeah, that gets back to like, you need to have the right data on chain. If it's not on chain, you need to have it available off chain so that AI agents have all the information necessary to operate without having to use the UI, for example. And yeah, like AI agents make way more sense when they're operating directly on smart contracts rather than trying to use like this additional layer of a UI. The funny thing about like OpenClaw and stuff is everyone I know who's using it a lot still has so many things where like, I don't trust giving it full access to this yet or this, that. So I feel like if people aren't even giving it access to all their emails yet, we're a ways off from giving it like full autonomous access to money. But I'm sure there will be use cases that emerge. But also Alchemix is meant to be this like slow moving protocol. So I imagine that it's more of like AI is like, hey, I think you should check your Alchemix position. It's been a month and you check it and you're fine. Like, we're not trying to create these like down to the millisecond interactions. It's fine if those interactions exist and serve to better the protocol. But if you create protocols where the only way to use them is to be the fastest, then like you're not helping society at that point. You're just creating like PvP gambling, essentially.
I very much agree. Have you ever read the book Other People's Money?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I'll send it to you later.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting take on financial markets. There's also, of course, a famous movie about the same, but it's a really interesting take about financial markets and that the structure of them is kind of backwards. For example, in crypto, we've done an amazing job creating 24/7 trading and 24/7 markets, which is some real value, I think, for society. But the author's point is like, well, hey, how much is that value really? Like, could we compress all securities trading, all equities trading into a 7-day window, effectively enforcing a long-term time horizon on all capital markets participants? And would that change society for the better?
Okay, I definitely read that book.
I'll send it to you later, and
That's
you can go around. It's really interesting, especially for, I think, everybody in our field, since we're in a position to go and reconstruct how these markets work if we want. And in many ways, I think Alchemix is like, you guys have always been a very long-term oriented project.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because for a while it was that's another thing is like, I think if we didn't have enough of a treasury, we would have probably had to pivot into more short term at some point, just because like for a while in crypto, just if you manage to even figure out how to get funds on chain, at that point you're not looking for something boring. Like, it was exhilarating just to like figure out how to get money on chain. So if you're going to do that, you're going to be a very active participant. Now we're starting to see more ways for people to more easily get funds on chain and do something more passive with it. And that's where Alchemix is going to shine a lot more, is when you don't need this like crazy exciting daily dopamine use case, which was kind of all people wanted for a while in crypto.
I'm looking forward to it. Expectations setting them high.
Yeah. Now we're all just tired and we're like, I just want to park my yield.
Oh, well, I am looking forward to it for what it's worth. Like an interesting fixed yield product would be pretty compelling. But I'll put my own portfolio aside for a moment. I want to touch on the AI agents thing one more time, because I think we're just beginning to see increasing autonomy in a lot of these agents in pursuing their users' goals, whatever those goals happen to be. But have you seen agent interactions on your smart contracts yet? And if you had, could you even tell? Like, how would you know? Because I feel like this is a canary in the coal mine kind of signal.
Yeah.
Really interesting to watch for.
Yeah, I'm guessing, and for the record, I do use AI pretty heavily, but like Scoopy Trooples, our founder, is probably he's like the main like OpenClaw user, for example, in the org. So he would probably have interesting thoughts on this, and you as well, I'm sure, have a lot of opinions. So I'm definitely not an authority on this, but my understanding is one, there, I mean, we look at a lot of transactions, we monitor for suspicious activity and things like that. And occasionally you'll get someone just doing these like nonsense transactions that are probably some sort of like penetration testing with small amounts. And sometimes they're just like really stupid, and there's a lot of them. And that's where I'm like, maybe this is AI, because I doubt some person is sitting here and hitting submit on every one of these like repeated transactions. But the other thing is, like, AI is so good at coding, right? So I think a lot of times like AI is probably used to create these contracts that are maybe trying to interact with Alchemix things. However, you're not, unless you like go dive into the code and go like, oh, this is shitty AI code. It's just going to look like another address interacting with Alchemix, unless again they're doing weird patterns or something. Yeah, so like, because it's kind of like the AI is writing the code and the code's interacting, so the code's hard and fast at that point. But the other thing is Alchemix doesn't currently allow smart contract interactions, so people have to interact through the EOA, which is where they give AI and EOA. That's where it's doing some stupid stuff. But as far as I know, most of our users are manually managing their funds. I've not heard, aside from on-chain analysis, I've not heard of anyone doing much with Alchemix. But I do think you probably do need a smart contract to do that, which that's one thing we did prioritize in Alchemix v3, is ensuring that smart contract interactions would be allowed so that people can build more interesting use cases. And that probably does enable more AI agents as well.
I'm really curious to hear about that. Do keep the rest of the world apprised with your discoveries here, because you're going to be our warning as to when the financial Skynet emerges and becomes the world.
Yeah, right? One day we just see all the bots using Alchemix.
Obviously, I see a lot on my side, but it's the real world economic interactions that are going to be the most exciting. Even on the security side, like we have a detection agent. Still co-piloting.
Most of the AI I see is people just trying to AI generate security reports, which y'all do a great job at filtering out, by the way. That is, y'all do good stuff there.
We are in a permanent war.
Yep.
But we are winning. We are winning. Yes, we have figured out the solution, which is obviously more AI. But
fight AI with AI.
But that's another thing. That's a rabbit hole. I want to touch on something that you brought up earlier, which is the governance side of things. And you mentioned that you guys have built governance into the core of V3. This is a very interesting comment because, I think a lot of us in the industry feel that on-chain governance has been a not totally, but like a by and large failed experiment.
Mostly Fugazi.
Right. And I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of hope and promise, and you only need one success to kind of justify 1,000 failed experiments, if that's the kind of thing that can work at massive scale. Like, one Aave is a great product. One Ethereum justifies 1,000 chains, so to speak. Yeah. But I want to understand your point of view. Since you guys are going all in on this, you're not letting the FUD of every other mediocrely run DeFi protocol get to you guys. How are you thinking about governance in a way that's different?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to reevaluating everything in the reality of the traditional legal system, and the fact that most people don't care about governance, and the fact that if you want them to care, you got to pay them and align incentives and things like that. So just taking the optimistic view that it's possible, taking the pessimistic view that it's not a great system. And so it kind of comes down to like, one, just designing, like, obviously you're writing a protocol, make everything immutable you can possibly make immutable. Great. You're not going to be able to do that for everything. For a DeFi protocol, you have dependencies and things like that. So immediately you're going to need people to make decisions. From there, the idea is you try to design the protocol in a way that the decisions are pretty granular, black and white, yes, no, or simple, and require minimal decisions. So like, for example, you can change the max LTV in Alchemix. You're not going to change that much, if ever. You can change the timeline that the assets are redeemed on, like how much time it takes. Maybe every few months or a year, you might change that. Like just these decisions that ultimately will make like have bias in the economics of the protocol, but don't require that much tweaking or things like that. Those are good for on-chain governance, because it's like Vitalik's convex versus concave decisions. What benefits from experts making the decision versus what benefits from just like an average of everyone deciding. Economic decisions are great for governance because it's kind of this hodgepodge group of people who all have vested interest in Alchemix trying to decide what parameters might be good. From there, the reality is like the paying people payroll, treasury management, all that stuff does not need to be a DAO decision. The other big aspect of this is fiduciary responsibility. I think the main benefit of on-chain governance is that fiduciary responsibility can essentially be outsourced to this decentralized decision-making process, where it's like, if you give me your money and say like, hey, manage this for me, it can go to Aave, Alchemix, Morpho, all these protocols, any of these. As soon as I decide if your money goes to one of those protocols, I'm bearing a fiduciary responsibility, even though it's like not that much of a decision. And to avoid that fiduciary responsibility would require you telling me exactly what I can do with your money, like no gray area, no nothing. And so DeFi has two issues. With one, we have all sorts of people managing other people's money with no sorts of credentials whatsoever, which is an issue because then money gets mismanaged and obfuscated and unregulated and people lose their money. But the other issue is that being a fiduciary is a ton of regulatory overhead. It's super expensive, and it's really limiting. And so I think on-chain governance is potentially the solution to this, where we have the protocol that's somewhat immutable. We have on-chain governance, which is deciding like within the immutable parameters where the money should go and making some of these like more biased decisions that ultimately will not result in much more risk. It's more of just like, hey, based on-chain governance, we're putting money in this approved yield strategy instead of this approved yield strategy. And then you have things like associations and foundations and stuff who can take over the development of new protocols, the development of the front end, the payroll, the managing of the treasury. Even you can set up ways to just delegate treasury management with certain rules and legal structures. And so it's just admitting that like most things don't need to go to on-chain governance, but anything where you're making a decision with other people's money rather than like the protocol's treasury, that's a really good place to use on-chain governance, I think. But this is all like a theory right now, because obviously the legal structures are still being developed for all of this. So, and the last thing that makes on-chain governance possible now is we're going to use Aragon OSX, which essentially in the past, it's just you have one way to vote. And no matter what the decision is, it's always the same voting process.
Sure.
Aragon OSX lets you create multiple voting processes, and you assign a different voting process to every single function in the contract that's being managed. So you could have a voting process that's like, anyone can propose, we just need 50% of the vote as yes. And maybe that's something as simple as like adjusting the redemption timeline for the synthetic assets. Something that like, if it's changed to the wrong value, it's not a big deal, change it back, whatever. Then you have things like smart contract upgrades. You need to have this much ALCX to propose it. You need 75% of the vote to pass. The Alchemix Association is listed as a vetoer on this role. Like you pulling all the stops out for that one. And so by doing that, you can create way less friction on these minor decisions while still ensuring that you have a ton of friction on these major decisions. And then that way, when you have these minor votes, you don't need to paint everybody on Discord and raise a stink and all that, because people get so tired of that. But the like one time a year you have a smart contract upgrade, then you can like selectively rally the troops and use the pings, and people aren't tired of it because it's only happened once a year. So it makes governance fatigue far more manageable when you can have different processes for different types of decisions.
I think that makes a ton of sense. One question I've been thinking about for a long time has been, what's the new financial instrument that is going to come out of our industry for managing programmable equity in really the most efficient way? Like, it's clear that tokens are great in so many ways as financial instruments. They're superior to traditional stock shares for a variety of reasons. The asset and the unit of account are the same things. Like, you don't need separate registries all over the place in a bunch of different people's databases in order to manage the asset. You have direct link from the contracts that govern the assets and determine all of the units relative to that token, and they can interact directly with the trading infrastructure, with the investing infrastructure, whatever have you. And that's incredibly magical. But there's been this disconnect between that and the traditional legal safeguards that have made equity a really viable social technology.
Yep.
And it sounds like you guys are moving towards a version where you're solving a piece of that, on farming fiduciary duties out to the community itself by being like, hey, look, you're responsible as a token holder for this. And by implication, as a user, you may not be a user of the product, you might just hold tokens, but by implication, you should be thinking about what the long-term value of that is going to be. And then you have, increasingly specific voting patterns and conditions in order to satisfy certain changes.
Yeah.
Which is really cool, I would say.
Maybe, and one thing worth mentioning there is then the last piece of the puzzle is our staking system, which is it's a queuing in and out system, which essentially means if you are acting as a governor staking ALCX, how many people can enter or exit the system within a couple months. And so if you make some decisions and you're part of the voting group that like raises revenue a bunch, you can only be diluted to a certain extent. Versus like people who might just buy up ALCX and stake it because they're like, oh, the staking revenue is higher now. Like, no, you have to have a delay in that so that people can actually benefit from the long-term decisions they're making. So I think that's going to help. And then lastly, the idea is you share the system revenue with the stakers. And then the last little feature is you can have subsets of staking. So like, again, maybe you don't need every ALCX holder to decide when you update the redemption timeline. And so you can have something like, okay, if you're just staking in Alchemix, you get your share of 50% of the revenue that Alchemix generates. If you would like to farther stake into the transmuter group, 5% of the revenue that goes to Alchemix goes to this subset. And so by default, you'll probably get about 10% of the stakers who want to do this additional work to earn this additional income. So you can farther modularize things like that. And I think the beauty of this modularity is this is not all going to be live day one. Day one, we can have governance set up so that the multi-sig makes every decision. Day 30, we can say, okay, we're turning over the transmuter timeline decision, the redemption timeline decision to on-chain governance with this rule. And you can slowly add responsibility to the on-chain governance system, which solves the chicken and egg problem where you need people participating in on-chain governance to make it worthwhile, but you need revenue in a legitimate system for people to want to participate in the first place. So you can just build up every piece slowly but surely. So it's still a very long-term thing, but it starts with this staking system and things like that.
Do you think that the future of this kind of like neo token equity model, which is not quite what you guys have, but like moving in the direction of professionalizing the whole thing and making it really work for a much larger scale and make objectively better business decisions on the allocation of capital and resources, what do you think is missing? Is it and is it always is it going to need to be a custom process? Like you guys are very much innovating and rolling your own on this.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, you're using Aragon, which will help, but like you're
Yeah.
deciding the parameters.
The rest of our system will be open source too, so we hope other people take our head start and use it. But yeah, with equity, I mean, I feel like the issue that arises with equity is you have all these private companies who own equity in these protocols. And the way we've handled that with Alchemix is we created an association, which is its sole mission is to help Alchemix. Its sole mission is to spend money to help Alchemix. It is literally not allowed to own equity. It does not have anything like that. So in that way, the equity is simply that on-chain governance owns the treasury and therefore decides what to do with it. But yeah, I do think this like equity stuff that people have done for valid legal protection reasons is a big issue in DeFi right now. And I hope that like even Across today is talking about the equity, had a big equity update where they're going to maybe let people convert Across tokens to equity. But that just means there's no more tokenization anymore, sure, which is kind of a failure of tokens. So it's definitely one of these various like legal issues that arise in crypto. So like that's one of them is just where do tokens fit into equity and can we marry those in a more fair way for everyone? And I actually had the privilege of sitting down with a political action committee and talking to some state senators just to present like issues in DeFi. That was one of them we touched on, but the other one I touched on to these state senators was just this consideration of fiduciary responsibilities, especially as it ties to security. Like, as you know, in security, people have roles that let them pause protocols for security reasons, but that is a fiduciary responsibility because they have the potential to block people from accessing their funds. And we just need much clearer regulations on like, at what point can we just let people have certain responsibilities for a safety perspective and not have to make them into fiduciaries? And can we get some sort of clarification? This is all US perspective, but ultimately what each country needs like is a way for you to know as a citizen of that country, if you have certain powers in a DeFi protocol, is that okay?
Koala, you're revealing your clout that you're sitting down with the US Senator. See more into your pseudonymous. Your life behind might be even more dramatic.
Like, I'm like Sam Kuzman from Frax, the founder. He's gone way deeper in this rabbit hole than I have, but he was on that meeting as well. So I'm like following Sam's lead, essentially 2 years behind. But yeah, hopefully I can give them some good insights. So.
Well, look, it's all very compelling. I mean, it's the question I think a lot of us are concerned with. So I'm glad that you guys are having these conversations and experimenting on the front lines. I have one final question.
Yeah, I have a few more minutes if we need it. I can go a couple minutes over.
Okay. I wanted to go a little bit in this direction. I mean, the cultural direction, I guess. So, an interesting thing about your work over the years, Koala, has been this long-term time horizon. You guys are continuing to innovate at Alchemix. In a lot of ways, I think your project is one of the better standard bearers for the industry in terms of, yes, creating something novel, a unique kind of new primitive, but also continuing to innovate and solving the real problems that are in front of you that stand in the way from creating a great on-chain business that is also decentralized. That can also be, a hallmark of this new on-chain world that we're creating. Having said that, the overall culture of our industry has changed a ton in this time, right? Like, I don't know about you, but when I got started, there was not a suit in sight. And the last conference I went to, I was like, given dirty looks because I wasn't.
Yep.
So I was like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? I mean, things are different. And I want to understand, from your perspective, how do you see the culture of the industry changing, the users changing, the customers changing, your partners changing? Like, how are you seeing and feeling all of, I guess, the shift that's going on beneath our feet?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Way more suits now for sure. And even ETH Denver this year, for example, not as many suits, but you could tell it was like institutions and organizations and stuff, not like retail who are trying to figure out where to put money, how to use DeFi and stuff like that. It's a double-edged sword because on one hand, like in theory, an institution using DeFi can be much more effective and then therefore potentially provide a service to someone to give them maybe even better yield than they would get using DeFi on their own, or just like way more protections or things like that. So that can be good. But we like at the same time, you need to make sure you don't lose sight as a DeFi protocol of still having an access point where you don't need to go through an institution. And I do think Morpho has done a good job of that, where I can still just go to the Morpho front end and use it myself. But there are also all these different ways I could end up using Morpho through a company or an institution. So I think as long as we don't lose sight of like these DeFi protocols still need to be accessible in a permissionless manner, and that's the risk is like if you get some big institutions, they might try to take some political actions to try to make it so the only way to access DeFi is through them, and that would be really, really bad. I think that's the biggest risk, and I think that's why we're not like committing to specific user base right now, because we don't want to restrict other people who may want to use Alchemix from doing that. So yeah, things are definitely changing. I think it's great overall that like more integration into the traditional system is happening, as long as we still also preserve the ability to be our own system. Like right now, you can still go buy ETH, get it on chain, take loans against it, and do that in a way where you're not privy to like any specific government or anything. But you can also go to Coinbase and use Morpho, and that's fine too, as long as both possible. So yeah, that's my view on it, I guess.
Have you seen that Bitcoin meme where they have the gray stick figures and the white stick figure, and there's a bunch of gray stick figures and they captured the white stick?
No, I don't think you'll have to send that one to me.
Let me send it. Bitcoin institutionalization. It's like it's pretty funny. I'll see if I can find it, because it's always. Oh, I got it. Okay, it's even worse. Sorry, it's not. It's like a raging pink, eyes bleeding kind of guy. I'll send it. And the BlackRock, the ultra normie, 1984 stick figures. He plunge his hand into him, and where it hits his pink skin, he starts to turn gray, like the normie institutions, kind of like kind of way. I can't help but think that as you mentioned the institution. I think it's great too, by the way. My challenge when I joined. I think I was pretty early to the conclusion, like probably 8 years ago, that we were going to win and we would just become plumbing for everybody. And most people don't care about how most of finance is done. It's kind of a boring zone. Yep. And that was going to happen to us, and that was going to be a mark of victory, not defeat. Mm-hmm. But that inevitably meant a certain amount of integration, which inevitably meant compromise. And that's what we've been doing. But I would like to see more persist, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
On the flip side of that question, what do you make, a lot of the famous people, I would say, on our side who have been building things have become maybe less famous is not the right term, no longer quite so public facing, no longer so vocal. So in addition to slowly being institutionalized and growing in very considerable scale in cash flows, which is great, we're also seeing a change of the guard, so to speak, in the type of voices that are relevant and the types of ideas that are being put out there. What do you make of that? Are you seeing the same thing that I'm thinking, or do you think I'm just seeing, it's my particular, echo bubble of security that I have that perception?
No, I think you're right. I mean, naturally people do come and go. And then also I think it naturally happens with price. Like if you're a protocol founder and your protocol and tokens are doing great, you're going to be loud in public. But if your price goes down, people start to come at you and you may not want to be as public anymore. So that's a natural path I think people take. And then also just there with more TradFi coming in the space, there is a group of people who will give you less credentials if you're a non, versus in the past you kind of got more credentials if you were a non. So that's been an interesting shift. And I think also we're just in this phase where yes, there are still 0 to 1 innovations here and there, but a lot of it is we proved this works. Now we got to do all the dirty work of integrations of improving little bits on systems to figure out why like they weren't adopted by this industry or this industry. And a lot of that just is kind of boring and people don't want to hear about it, even if you do talk about it. Like I could write a whole Twitter thread on like this fiduciary government stuff, but like ultimately people probably won't care. Some people do, which is great. And you work with those people to solve these problems. But I think there's just not as much on the daily to talk about it, like a high level, at least based on like the type of work I've been doing over the last couple of years. But now we have it with V3. That's hopefully a 0 to 1 thing. But yeah, that's my thoughts. I do got to run though, but
big expectations there with the V3. Let's wrap it up here and free you. Thanks for giving us the extra time. I learned a bunch. This is really interesting. God willing, I'm going to be one of those people in the trenches with you, Koala, building this future. I think we still have a lot more work to do.
Yeah, but you all have been a big help for V3 and everything. So yeah, Immunefi is a great long-term partner for sure.
Thank you very much. Hopefully for many years yet.
Yes.
Now, as we wrap up, final thing, speaking of tokens of the future, if you haven't already checked out the work that we're doing with Immunefi and the Immun token, I really encourage you guys to do that. We're trying to push forward what it means to be security infrastructure in the industry. We're just getting started. We don't have our own V3 to share with you yet, but we have some things very similar coming soon. And I really encourage you guys all to get educated on how that's going to work. The future is now, as you can see from the kind of conversation we're having. And thank you again for tuning in, for listening. It was a great conversation. And really, you got to follow Koala, check out all the work that he's doing. The kind of stuff that they're doing is still, I think, the bleeding edge, the frontier of DeFi and what it stands for in its best sense. So thank you again, Koala. Thank you again, everybody, for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Ciao.